Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 6 of the Squeaky Wheel podcast. We speak with leading influencers about policy, industry and more across cycling, walking and all other forms of human-scaled mobility. My name is Phil Latz and I've been squeaking about various causes for over 40 years.
And I'm Sarah Stace, Director of Cities at Vivendi Cities, joining today from Meanjin in Brisbane. Before we introduce you to this month's guest, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe via your podcast platform of choice and leave us a review, especially on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for your support. Phil, one of the events that I look forward to every year is the Transport Professionals Association Conference. It's hosted in a different city each year, and this year it's Brisbane's turn. From the 8th to the 11th of September, transport professionals from around the country will debate the theme, Shaping the Future, Moving the Now, examining how we plan, move and connect, while also enabling thriving, inclusive and sustainable communities. And what I love most about this conference, apart from networking with our peers, of course, are the keynote speakers who are always so inspiring.
I couldn't agree more, Sarah. I've been lucky enough to go to a few of these conferences in the past, and this year delegates will be hearing from close to 100 speakers, including influential leaders such as Hill Penalosa from 880 Cities, Teresa Wells from GHD New Zealand, Sally Stannard, the Director General of the Queensland Department of Transport and Main Roads, and Professor Amelia Thorpe from the University of New South Wales. And of course, most importantly, they'll be hearing from my co-host Sarah and our podcast promotions manager Mark Ames. And I'll also be attending and love to say hi to anyone who's there.
Yes, I will be running a workshop, Phil, on what to do when good transport ideas get stuck, where I'll present on the 7 systems that hold up good transport decisions and how to address them. And this year, the conference has a range of practical, hands-on workshops so you can participate in a lively learning environment to address real-world problems and solutions. From policy and planning to delivery and operations and across every career stage, the TPA National Transport Conference is the annual event where transport professionals connect, challenge each other's ideas and shape the future of our cities and regions. So don't miss out. Registrations are now open at transportprofessionals.com.au. That's transportprofessionals.com.au. We'll be speaking with Henk Swarttouw. Henk had a distinguished career as a diplomat in the Dutch Foreign Service, serving in the United States, France, and the United Kingdom. This culminated in becoming Dutch ambassador to Finland and later to Denmark. Henk is now an independent advisor on sustainable mobility and international cooperation. In 2019, he joined the board of the European Cyclists Federation, or ECF, and became the president in 2021, a voluntary role that he still serves in today. Henk is also a certified EuroVelo long-distance cycle tourism route inspector. That's a job that I'd love to have. And served on the EuroVelo Council from 2019 to 2025. He's married with 2 grown-up daughters and, when not on the road, divides his time between Amsterdam and Helsingborg in Sweden.
Henk Swarttouw, welcome to the Squeaky Wheel podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. Why did you decide to move from being a high-flying and presumably well-paid international ambassador to being a volunteer cycle advocate?
That's a long story. I mean, that will take half of the podcast, but I'll try to be brief. Well, I'm a Dutchman. I cycled all my life. I cycled to school from I was 6 years old, and I continued cycling to university and then to work, and I continued to do that as well when I was working abroad at Dutch embassies in different capitals around the world. So in 2012, I found myself ambassador to Finland. I cycled to the embassy although I had a car and a driver, but I cycled to the embassy. Somehow the press noticed, they wrote about it in the newspaper in Helsinki. And shortly thereafter, I was approached by a couple of Finnish cycling activists who said, you're the Dutch ambassador, you cycle. We want us to become like the Netherlands. Can you help us? So I got in touch with the Dutch cycling embassy, brought them over. We did some workshops. We talked to politicians. I became a kind of mascot for the Finnish cycling movement, riding critical mass, things like that, making the speech at the opening of the winter cycling season, and so on. And then I moved to Denmark, and in Denmark they were not waiting for a Dutch ambassador to tell them how to cycle. I became friends with the then CEO of the Danish Cyclists Federation, and a couple of years later, he and his Dutch colleague, they said, we are looking for candidates for the board of the European Cyclists Federation. I'd never heard about the European Cyclists Federation, but I thought it sounded fun. And at around the same time, I was looking at bringing my professional life in diplomacy to an end. So it was a good moment. I was elected to the board of the European Cyclists Federation. And about a year later, I resigned from the Foreign Service. And don't worry about the well-paid job. I have an excellent pension. That's what I do now. Since 2020 I've been a volunteer in the service of more and better cycling for all.
And what things might you have learnt in your career as a diplomat that have been helpful to you as a cycling advocate?
I have learned how internal government decision-making works. I have learned how to walk the corridors of power, if you like. I have learned that there's a complementarity between high-level political negotiation and advocacy and street-level activism. Both need one another. It was very well visible at the Glasgow climate conference 6 years ago, where all delegates, all officials had to run the gauntlet of the local Glasgow Scottish cycling activists who were outside the venue with placards and megaphones and things like that. And inside the negotiating room, where there was we and a couple of others who were working for cycling in climate policy, which was originally only about electric vehicles. It's amazing to what extent those climate conferences on the inside are dominated by big oil, by the car industry, by the whole automobility complex. Amazing,
but rather sad. You've moved to Helsingborg in Sweden. What attracted you to move there?
My wife. My wife's from here. She followed me all my life across the world, and the deal was that when I would quit, then we would settle back where she came from. So that's what we did. It was in the middle of COVID.
If you walked out of your room where you are right now and onto the street, what sort of street scene would you see?
I don't know what you call it in English, but a village. This is a one-road village. A village by the sea. So on one side of the road, there is a row of houses, and then there is the sea, and across the sea there's Denmark, and on the other side there's one row of houses, and then there are some meadows, and then there is a bit of forest, and there's only one way into the village, one way out, and it's a shared road. There is not really a sidewalk, but there is an unpaved area where you can walk. Bikes, buses, and cars share the road. The max speed is 40. There are some speed reducing structures, some bottlenecks. Mostly the maximum speed is respected, but particularly at night, sometimes people drive too fast. It's rural.
Lovely. Sounds lovely.
But it is part of the EuroVelo network. Because this road it's actually along the sea from Helsingborg up to Gothenburg and then Oslo, and then continues all the way to the North Cape. So I see a lot of leisure cyclists and cycling tourists coming by, actually, outside my window. I see them now, although the weather is horrible today.
The actual ECF itself, for those who are listening who are not so familiar with the organisation, could you just briefly paint a broad brush overview? How many staff do you employ? Where are most of them based? And what are the main activities that they do?
So the European Cyclists Federation is the umbrella organization of civil society cyclist organizations from all over Europe, basically covering all countries in Europe with a few exceptions. And we also have associate members who are either not from Europe or they are not civil society organizations. They can join, but they don't have a vote like the full members have. We have an office in Brussels, about 35 FTE, including 5 or 6 interns. And they all, except for one, they're all based in Brussels. What we do is organize the annual Velocity conference. We coordinate the EuroVelo long-distance cycle network in Europe at the international level, marketing, branding, certification, quality control, concept development, etc. Then we do advocacy, but only international advocacy. So we don't work with national governments. We work with the EU institutions, the Council of Europe, the World Health Organization, Climate Conference, other parts of the UN system, the OECD, etc., where we try to get cycling on the agenda. We try to include cycling where it is being forgotten in other legislative processes. We work for more funding from international bodies for cycling, etc. And of course, we try to prevent legislation which would work against cycling or which would have another negative impact, like obligatory insurance. That's a good example. And finally, we do projects, often cross-border projects financed by the European institutions or by major charities, some of the foundations that support us, such as the FIA Foundation, the Novo Nordisk Foundation. It's a mixed bag. And then we organize our networks, not only our members, but we have a network of about 70 cities and regions for cyclists. We have a network of academics, scientists for cycling. We run a franchise which is called the Cycle Friendly Employer Scheme, which works with national franchises, help our members get some of their funding. We run the Women in Cycling Network. Well, it's a lot of it is network based, but then of course we're also a center of expertise because we are the only NGO international organization which is purely focused on cycling. There are some others which work on active mobility in the wider sense, or sustainable mobility, or urban mobility. But we have found a niche, you could say, and people know where to find us. We're almost 50 years old, been around for a long time. Well, are well known and well respected in the international mobility policy world.
That sounds amazing. Henk, as a diplomat, before you settled into Helsingborg, you've lived in some of the world's top cities. In your lived experience, which cities have been the most progressive when it comes to cycling, and what were the key ingredients that led to their success?
Well, if we're only talking about the cities where I lived, and then we will exclude the Dutch cities because that's like home, then it would be Paris, but that's after I left. I left Paris in 2001, although it was starting around then. I mean, most of the credit, of course, and justifiably so, goes to Anne Hidalgo, the mayor for the past, 10 years? The mayor, her predecessor, Bertrand Delanoë, he actually started it. Maybe one of you even was at Velocity in Paris, and you might have experienced it in the early 2000s. So Paris has made a lot of progress, and the more important thing for me is that Paris has shown that it can be done fast. The Netherlands is a wonderful cycling country, but it took 50 years. And in Paris, they are trying to do the same thing in maybe 30 years. Yeah, and I was just going to mention London, which is also making a lot of progress. The more centralized setup of the Paris administration makes it easier. In London, the boroughs have a lot of power themselves. So this is, I mean, that's not about the ambitions of the Greater London government, but it's some administrative structures are more unwieldy than others. And that's what you even see at country level, and I'm sure you have that in Australia as well, that the way government is organized sometimes facilitates quick progress, but it can also impede quick progress. And you see it particularly in cycling, where the responsibilities are often a bit diffuse, that some responsibilities are for local government, some for regional government, some national governments stand back completely. You say, no, this is not something that we're going to do at the national level, whereas others go for a national cycling strategy, which they implement across the country. So the structure of government is important for how to deal with it. And then if you're an advocate, you also need to know that structure very well to know where you need to plug in with your advocacy.
Henk, with your diplomat's hat on, what would you say to politicians who think that cycling is something only for the Lycra road warriors as a sport and not as a form of everyday transport?
Well, I'd say to them, look around you. Many of the trips that people take are shorter than 3 or 5 kilometers. Car trips I'm talking about. And they can easily be replaced by 3-kilometer trips can be replaced by walking, and up to 7 kilometers by cycling, and even further when you consider e-bikes. Cycling takes up a lot less road space. There is less noise. There are less parking issues, less congestion. Car traffic is such an incredibly ineffective use of urban space. I mean, and I'm sure when you need to take your mother-in-law or a sofa somewhere, that it's difficult to do that by bike. But most people, when they are in their car, they are not with their mother-in-law. They are not transporting a sofa. But the other side is that, of course, there's leisure cycling, recreational cycling, sports. But nobody says don't walk, because that's only for people who do athletics, right?
Indeed, correct.
I like it.
I made it up right now.
No, we'll pay you good money for that one, Henk. That was very good.
So you've been the vice president and then the president of ECF for over 7 years, I understand. And you mentioned, for example, attending the United Nations climate negotiations and getting cycling on the agenda. What are some of the other, say, top 3 achievements that you're most proud of so far with the ECF?
Well, we are, of course, the European Cyclists Federation. So our main target, not our only target, but our main target is the European level decision making. Very, very clearly, our biggest success being the European Declaration on Cycling, which was signed by all 3 branches of the European government, the Parliament, the Council, and the European Commission, which basically puts cycling at the heart of urban mobility. Not even a level playing field, but prioritizes cycling. And we're seeing now, after 2 years, that it's trickling down through the institutions in more and more areas of legislation. You see that cycling is included. There's more funding for cycling, and that trickles down also to national governments, to regional and local governments in the form of funding, but also simply in the form of making it more mainstream, you could say. The other 2 things that I'm very proud of are, of course, our series of Velocity conferences. I'm not going to say it's coming to a place near you, but anyway, more or less in the same time zone as where you are next year in Ehime, Japan. Velocity really is the World Cycling Congress, and basically the only one of its kind. We just had a wonderful edition in Rimini, Italy. And finally, I would say the EuroVelo network, which is the European long-distance cycle network, more than 90,000 kilometers of cycle network in Europe. Nobody is going to cycle 90,000 kilometers, and very few people even do 10,000 kilometers from the North Cape to the Mediterranean. But it's the backbone. It overlaps with national, regional, local cycling routes. And it's a great instrument to promote leisure cycling, cycling tourism. Well, you know all about that, Sarah. People are more and more interested in active holidaying instead of just spending 2 weeks at the beach. They want to move. They want to move in a sustainable manner. They want to be in the open air. They want to be active. So that's really growing, and it will be included, we assume, European Sustainable Tourism Strategy, which will be published later this year. So those are basically the European Declaration, the Velocity Conference Series, the EuroVelo Network. But those are not my achievements. Those are the achievements of the team, and particularly VeloCity has been running since 1980. EuroVelo started in the late 90s. Those are long-term issues.
Okay, Henk, you just mentioned VeloCity, and Sarah and I have both had the pleasure of attending that multiple times. I'm not sure, how many VeloCities have you been to, Sarah?
I think 3 now.
3.
And I'm definitely going to the one in Ehime in Japan.
Yeah, I've been to 4 so far, and I think the one in the Netherlands about 7 or 8 years ago was probably the best event I've ever been to.
That was my first.
Okay.
I was still a diplomat back then.
Well, it was a wonderful event. But given that it's so important to the ECF, both as a revenue source, looking at your financials, it's one of your top 3 revenue sources, and for gathering of all your members, why do you hold it in such diverse, small and distant locations, such as Matsuyama, Japan?
I'll tell you. Why do we do that? It's an open process. It's like the Olympics. So we do a call for bids 3 years before the conference. And then about 40, 50 cities may request the materials. Perhaps 10 of them send in a bid book, which is then scored and examined. It's a very, very rigorous process. Then the top 3 are presented to the ECF board as a shortlist. Then the ECF board approves the shortlist, or they don't. The 3 shortlisted cities, they get a site visit by our VeloCity team, 3-4 days or a week. They write another report, and they go through the whole planning process with the cities. And then in the end, the ECF board decides, even so that if members of the board have a city from their country competing, they're excluded from the decision making. They sometimes don't even get to know that the city from their country is shortlisted or which one it is. So we have a bit of safeguards there. And it's a competitive process. So if a city doesn't get awarded the conference, doesn't mean they had a bad bid. It means there was another one that was better. And then, of course, there is a bit of equitability in the sense that if we have just been to a city in Germany, then the year after that, we won't go to another city in Germany. And why are we going to Matsuyama, Japan? Because they have an excellent bid. Because we welcome bids from outside of Europe. For a long time, Sarah knows this, it was year on, year off in Europe at another continent. For a host of reasons that I will not go into here, we have been in Europe now since 2019. So it's also time to be outside Europe again. We have never been to Japan. And Japan is actually the 3rd cycling country in the world. And a very interesting cycling country with a very different cycling culture, with cycling being dominated by women, everyday cycling, that is. And on the other side, also a big focus on organized rides, sporty cycling.
I don't want to over-labour the point, but wouldn't it be both a bigger conference and a safer and more financially profitable bet if you just stuck to the major Western European cities such as London, Paris, Berlin, Amsterdam, where cycling's strong, they're easy to get to, and so on?
Well, this is not the place to go into the financial details, but it is important that we not only go to the usual suspects, because VeloCity also makes a difference. We were in Gdansk in Poland last year, first time in Poland, which really had an impact on cycling and cycling policy in the entire country, which leads to a national cycling strategy, to the establishment of a national cycling tourism authority. So there is this, what you could call the legacy effect. Part of the mission of VeloCity and of ECF is to spread knowledge, to spread cycling as a theme, as a political issue. It would, of course, be very comfortable, very profitable to move between Amsterdam and Copenhagen and Hamburg and maybe Barcelona or Paris. That's not what VeloCity is, and that's not what VeloCity is for. VeloCity is for spreading our message and make it as widely accessible as possible. I mean, people from all over the world travel to Europe every year to attend VeloCity. So why not bring VeloCity to them for once? And of course, attendance will be very different. There will be a lot fewer Europeans, but there will be lots more Asians, Australians, West Coast Americans. No, it's absolutely intentional. And it's not, so as I say, it's not only about money, it's about the message. If it would be a purely commercial effort, we would deal with it very differently.
Henk, the ECF, you've said, is a European Cyclists Federation. What's happening at the global level?
That's an excellent question, Sarah. ECF, or as I explained, for instance, about the climate conferences, works already at the global level. But it is a bit awkward to be the European Federation and to have the pretension to speak on behalf of all the world's cyclists. So one of my predecessors more than 10 years ago established the World Cycling Alliance, which was intended to be an umbrella organization for ECF-like organizations from other continents. But it never really took off. It didn't really manage to attract funding and to develop its own activities. So what we at ECF are looking at now is finding a way to establish a global presence on the basis of the existing organization, for instance, called International Cyclists Federation. But of course, our members, because we're members organizations, so they will need to approve for us to take that leap into the unknown. We are presently working on that internally in working groups and discussions at our annual general meetings. I don't know right now exactly where we will end up, but of course, I think it will benefit cycling all over the world if we would have a viable organization that would really speak on behalf of all the cyclists in the world, and which could be joined by civil society cyclist organizations from all continents. So it's a work in progress. I cannot forecast right now where we will end up, but it's definitely on our agenda.
As the president of the organization, what do you think your key role is in advancing the health and the strength of the organisation and so on? What do you focus your time and effort on?
Governance, that's one. A healthy organisation needs good governance. That's one of my focuses. Second is together with the CEO, Lauriane Creed, I'm the face of the organisation to the outside world. Third is fundraising, because our members only pay 10% of our budget. That means that the other 90% needs to come from elsewhere. We have a very good working relationship with the cycling industry, which I invest a lot of time and effort in. We get support from the European Commission, a number of charities, and then of course we have some revenue-generating activities, as you mentioned before, VeloCity, EuroVelo projects, etc. But seeing to it that every year there is enough budget to pay the staff, that is one of my biggest challenges.
Well, it seems like you're doing a very good job. And what are your predictions for the future? If you were looking, say, towards 2030, both for the ECF and cycling in general across Europe, what are your feelings and predictions?
I've started on my last year as chairman of the board. So you're asking me to judge my successor beforehand. That's a difficult job to do. I am quite confident that the modal share of cycling across the board, across the world, will continue to rise, but slowly, not as fast as we would hope or want. For ECF, I think it's much harder to predict, because that will depend a bit on what I mentioned earlier about whether we succeed in becoming an international federation or not, and how we will structure that, and we don't know that yet. I think the organization is in a good place. We're always worried about, will we continue to be able to fund everything that we do? But that's the same every year, and that will continue. But we're not looking at a very ambitious growth scenario or anything like that. The most important thing is that we will be able to continue to do our work. We have been doing it past 5, 6, 7 years We had a very tough time during COVID because some of our revenue streams suddenly evaporated. It's always difficult to make predictions, particularly about the future, right?
Indeed it is, which is why I asked you, like to put you on the spot. But the final question, we're coming to the end of our conversation. Is there anything that we didn't ask you that you'd like to share?
Oh, I'm sure there is a lot. I could talk for hours, but nobody wants to listen to my voice on the podcast for hours. So, particularly with this creaky chair. So I'm fine, Phil. Thank you. Well, I don't know where your listeners are based. Are they mainly in Australia or?
We've got so far we've had at least one listener from 69 different countries. And Australia is our number one, followed by USA, UK,
well, then,
and I can't remember the order, most of the European countries.
I would say to all your listeners, do come to Ehime, Japan, Matsuyama next year to see for yourself. Because Velo City, actually, everybody who has been there once says it's the most fun, best conference there. It's a hybrid between an academic conference and a rock festival. That's a way to put it. It's one of its kind, really. So come and see for yourself.
Indeed. Well, I was lucky enough to go to Gdansk and I took part in the ride. And when you have a Eastern European Zydeco folk band playing AC/DC, you know you're in something weird and wonderful. Henk Swarttouw, thanks for squeaking. Well, Sarah, wasn't that an interesting conversation with Henk?
Yeah, Phil, I found it really interesting interviewing a diplomat because diplomats obviously have to be diplomatic and say all the right things in the right way and be smooth about it. And I think it's really interesting to hear from someone who's been in that sort of position to someone who's now working in advocacy and on the other side of the fence. I thought he just had such an interesting take on the way that we in the cycling advocacy world can present ourselves to politicians and to present ourselves to government. It was a really interesting take. And I thought he gave such a great example at the COP in Glasgow, where the European Cyclists Federation was literally in the tent with the negotiators, making sure that cycling is on the table. And it really made me think that having someone with such a strong diplomatic background must have been so crucial to making that work.
Well, there's two interesting points you raised there, Sarah. Firstly, yes, he was a diplomat, but when I was hearing him talk about the things he was doing, especially in Finland, like going in critical mass rides and basically doing all this rabble-rousing, I was thinking, maybe only a diplomat from the Netherlands would have the cover to be able to do that. And the second point, when you mentioned about the COP in Glasgow in particular, and yes, he was inside the tent, but he made the point about how valuable it was having those rowdy people with placards, as in the cycling activists, outside. Various decision makers were having to run the gauntlet through each morning on the way to getting inside of that tent, and how that gave him and his colleagues more clout, if you like.
Yeah, I believe there was a billboard that they'd put out the front of the COP negotiations that was, I can't remember exactly what the phrasing was on it. Do you remember what it was, Phil?
I do remember that billboard vaguely, but what did it say, Sarah?
I'm pretty sure it said something like, "This machine fights climate change," and then had a photo of a bicycle.
What a great billboard. The other thing that came to mind strongly in that interview with Henk was when he was describing his role at the ECF and the priorities and so on. They really do a lot, and it really is arguably the world's most influential lobbying and activist group, if you like, for cycling. There's others that might argue that they are equal, and certainly in funding and scale might come close, but they're certainly right up there. So we're better off for having the ECF than not.
I agree. I had no idea that the ECF had so many different areas that it works on, and particularly when he was talking about that global negotiation with the World Health Organization and the Fear Foundation and others, it's pretty amazing to have a seat at the table and be talking to those sorts of organisation on the global stage. That's pretty profound, actually, that cycling gets such an opportunity to be there and talking to those sorts of organisations.
Yes, and very important that we are as well as a cycling community. We always finish with What's Up, which is a chance for us to say what we've been doing recently or what might be coming up in future. What's up, Sarah?
I've just finished running a marathon at the Gold Coast this weekend. My legs are still a bit sore. I'm running 3 marathons in 3 months to raise funds for Better Streets. So my next one is the Sydney Marathon in August, followed by the Berlin Marathon in September. So it's a huge block of training for me, but more importantly, it's for a good cause. Better Streets is an official charity fundraiser for the Sydney Marathon, which is a pretty big deal. And this year we've got 5 charity runners who are raising $3,000 each for Better Streets. So please jump in the show notes and click that button to donate. It's tax deductible, and I absolutely guarantee it is much easier to click the donate button than to run 42.2 kilometres.
You don't have to say any more to convince me about that, Sarah. Now, I've been on the Gold Coast Marathon site. I've looked at the photos. I've looked at your time and your split times. And all I can say is what a magnificent effort. Well done. You won't catch me running alongside you anytime soon.
Thank you, Phil. I got 5th in my age group, which I was very happy with. And I'm hoping I can continue to keep that up, particularly when I hit Berlin, which is one of the big global major marathons.
It's incredibly hard to get an entry into Berlin. Did you qualify for that, or how did you manage that?
I did, yes. It is based on time.
Wow, that is super impressive, because I know they have way more people who want to do it than can get to do it. So well done there.
Well, London and Boston are also on my radar one day.
Well, I've got 2 things for my WhatsApp. Firstly, by the time this podcast comes out, I'll be just days away from heading to the UK and Ireland for a 4-week holiday. And am I upset about that, leaving the Australian winter to head to the European summer? Not really. But I'll still be doing a little bit of work. I'll be recording a podcast episode with the CEO and part owner of one of the most iconic brands in the UK. Feel free to guess and forward us a message to our website if you like. And I'm also looking to do plenty of cycling on share bikes in London, Belfast, Dublin, and elsewhere. And that leads to my second What's Up point, which is Lime. Lime bikes seem to be everywhere in most cities where I've been lately. And I've ridden a lot of Lime bikes, got the app. I've got 4 or 5 apps too, so this is not a plug for Lime, I hasten to add. Because they're so ubiquitous, tend to ride Lime bikes a bit. And are you aware, Sarah, that it just floated on the NASDAQ on the 1st of July?
That's amazing, isn't it? To think that a company like that is floating on the NASDAQ. Incredible.
Well, and it's not just a small company either. They sold about 10% of the equity and they raised US $174 million, which gives it a notional market cap of 1.7 billion overall. Lime is big. It's in 230 cities, 29 countries, generating almost $1 billion US in revenue for the most recent year, which is over $2.5 million a day. And it's growing fast. It's growing at 20% year on year at the moment. And it's part owned by Uber, which is a multi-billion juggernaut, as most people have probably ridden an Uber at some stage in their lives. And being a part owner, Uber has integrated Lime into their Uber app. And quite a significant proportion of Lime rides are originated via the Uber app. Yep, it's true. So all those things are marvellous, but Lime is running at a loss. In fact, in the most recent year, it ran at a $59.3 million US loss, and it's carrying a lot of debt, of which $845 million US, which is a heck of a lot. I wouldn't mind that in my back pocket, Sarah, is due in the next 12 months. And they've only got a mere $260 million in cash. So they've got a serious shortfall. And the CEO, Wayne Ting, publicly stated in the documents prior to the float that if the float was not successful, there were genuine concerns about Lime's long-term financial viability. In other words, to be blunt, it could have gone bust. So Fortunately for Lime, the float was very successful, but we've seen a successful float in years gone by for a similar company at a similar valuation, which was Bird, which went on to become bankrupt. So just because Lime has succeeded in this float, it doesn't yet mean it's out of the woods. But I'm certainly glad that the float was successful. I think overall it's a great sign that enough people at the moneyed end of town think that bike share, scooter share has a sufficient future that they're bullish about investing 170 odd million US dollars. Even though for years I've been saying to anyone who would listen that if Lime ever floated, I'd buy some shares. When I did have a look at the data pre-float, I thought, nope, it's too risky for me. So I did not partake. Did you happen to buy a few Lime shares, Sarah?
I'd love to be in such a situation, but I'm not, Phil. But it is interesting though, because I think that the share bike industry was very nascent at the time that Bird floated, and it's really matured a lot. And we're also seeing cities maturing a lot in their approach to the way they tackle or address shared bikes. So it'll be interesting to see whether the market has changed enough. I don't mean the stock market, I mean the physical environments in which they're operating. And you can also see that their bikes have really evolved over time as well. And they're into, it's covering both e-scooters as well as e-bikes. So I think that it's industry that is still in change, but it's more mature along the curve than it was a few years ago.
I 100% agree. To be truly successful, cities have to partner with these share companies, and they have to see it as part of the public transport network and integrate it with the other forms of public transport. So lots of bike and scooter share parking spaces at train stations and bus stations, and ideally the one pass, whatever that might be in your city, that pass or account gets you onto a Lime bike just as easily as it gets you onto a tram or train or bus or ferry.
I agree, but then you get other places where, for example, Parramatta in Sydney, which is the second CBD for Sydney, doesn't have share bikes, for example. So it's really interesting to see actually how little the reach is for share bikes in some cities, and be interesting to see whether this float helps them to expand their offerings more into those types of developing markets.
Well, we can only hope. That's all for this month's Squeaky Wheel podcast. Until next month, keep squeaking.